Hello, this is this week's video for theories of crime. So you guys just finished your discussion board of Becker's Outsiders, one of the big texts in labeling theory. Becker is really the founder of labeling theory. You guys did a great job. I felt like people really did get what Becker was driving at. There's a few things I wanted to point out. Some of these are things that people mentioned in their posts already, but not all of you may have seen them. And then just some other kind of like observations about Becker. So one is that I enjoyed people's discussions of that labeling works in a positive and a negative sense. I think that's really true within Becker's theory. So just because you're being given a criminalistic label doesn't mean that you don't necessarily identify with it in a positive sense. If you guys didn't pick up on this, Becker's not particularly hostile to marijuana use. In fact, there's a couple of things. One is Becker was a jazz musician before he was a sociologist, and a lot of the subjects are his own. So very much so. He's writing about a world that he knows. And especially at that time, because you're thinking about the early 60s, jazz was kind of, you know, an edgier form of music, if you will, than what we think of it today. So yeah, in that sense, he's not going to be hostile to marijuana users, and as well as see like them taking on this as, you know, being a pothead is sort of a positive identification for a lot of people. There's value, you know, some people value it. And that also gets us to another point, and I think it's a point that I don't think we've talked a lot about, but a lot of our theories, particularly thinking about things like our social learning theories, but really most theories in general, are not going to be necessarily interested in the rightness or the wrongness of people's actions. Some of them are. I think that probably last week's Hershey's is a bit more like that. But generally speaking, morality is kind of usually thought of not as unimportant, but as outside the mode of analysis. So, different disciplines have different toolkits, and those toolkits are better for asking certain questions than others. In the social sciences, our toolkit is not particularly well geared to asking ethical questions. It's better for asking sort of empirical questions of what is, better than questions of how we should think or feel about what is. In this case, you know, often criminology, people misunderstand it in terms of like criminology should be this sort of like judgment about what criminals do, but instead it's often seen as an explanation about what criminals do, what they think, why they commit crimes. And Becker is very much so like that. So for Becker, labeling theory can the labels that we give to people, right, the identities that we hand them, reinforces criminal behavior. Whether or not that's a good thing is an open question, and probably something that should be taken case by case, and often is going to be determinant on how the particular like criminal will themselves deal with and interact with their label. So thinking about, like, you know, in the negative sense, we have sort of our study by Chambliss, where people really don't want to be labeled as a criminal, people being caught, you know, joyriding in a car. But nonetheless, like, that negative label alters their self-identification. They see themselves as a criminal and there's secondary deviance. Or it can work in the positive sense, where we see here with marijuana users. That marijuana users learn to identify with it through their friendships and their interaction around it, right? And as such, like, don't necessarily see anything wrong with it. And maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong. It's not really a place for the social scientists to try to figure that out. And labels also, on top of that, like, labels themselves everything you know about yourself to some degree from a social scientific or from a social psychological perspective is known. Everything you know about yourself is given by somebody else. It is itself a label. So that means that your entire orientation towards the world is dependent upon the things that you're labeled as. So that means that it's often both positive and negative all at once. So you are limited by what people label you as, right? What you see yourself as will often determine the activities that you like to do, the things that you'll know how to do, the things that other people will accept you knowing how to do. The things people will accept you as. So in that way, identity is very much so sort of limits us. It bounds us in. So in terms of criminal identity, this kind of means that often people are very bound by being identified as a criminal. This is why you often get, capable people, in their late 20s, early 30s doing stuff like washing dishes at restaurants because they've previously been incarcerated, or a good chunk of the homeless population are people who had previously been incarcerated. They may not even own the criminal label themselves, but people definitely do. It gets in the way of their ability to work. So here you see that labels can be very limiting, but labels also provide us with resources. They orient us to groups that we can make easy associations with, through which we learn, through which we gain access to things that fulfill our material needs, access to work, things like that. So labels are sort of a double-edged sword, and that's going to be equally true of criminal labels. Criminal labels are going to open up certain criminal opportunities. For marijuana users, there's going to be possibly, not only are you going to, make friends with other marijuana users, go to parties, interact with people, but you're also going to possibly, make revenue off of your marijuana use by selling marijuana. Those would be a resource that you could gain access to. If your label allowed for it, right? You may be an occasional user rather than somebody who smokes marijuana all the time. Or you may see yourself as a marijuana smoker, but not as a seller. Not as a dealer. The labels that we've been given, right, the labels that we're comfortable with, the things what we understand ourselves as, will largely be both limiting and, right, a mechanism through which we gain everything we have. You could think about through your life, so the things that people label you as stick. They have consequences. So if you think about you go to school and maybe you don't get very good grades and you're labeled as somebody who, is not smart, right? That may limit your ability to go to college or get a better paying job or, et cetera, et cetera. So here we see labels have consequences, and often labels have institutionalized consequences. And those are the limiting powers of those labels. Okay. One thing that a lot of people talked about, and I think that this is the good or bad experience of smoking marijuana in Becker's work. So for Becker's using that in a specific way. So the first time or early on when people smoke marijuana, they may have a good or bad experience. A bad experience, the colloquialism used today is often greening out. Basically, it means that you've smoked enough that the THC in your system causes you to have this very anxiety-driven, sort of spinny experience. And so that's a sort of a bad smoking experience, right? Versus having a positive experience of something that's enjoyable, that takes an edge off or whatever. And what Becker's wanting to claim here, and this is very much so in line with social learning theory as well as labeling theory, is that in essence what's going to determine whether people have a good or bad experience smoking marijuana is going to be the social context in which they smoke it. So it's going to be whether they're learning from others, certain attitudes, as well as certain like skill sets needed to smoke and enjoy. The same thing could be argued for like something like alcohol consumption. Drinking makes you, if you don't know how to do it right, drinking makes you, nauseous, it makes you vomit, it makes you spin, it makes you pass out. It makes you hungover. None of these things are positive experiences. So if somebody was to just like, I don't know, without having ever interacted with anybody else, go and buy a fifth of alcohol and then drink it by themselves, they're very likely to do it wrong. They're very likely to have a bad experience. Yet most of us learn to drink, if we learn to drink, in a social context. Then that way we develop certain skills. We also develop identities, ways of talking about drinking. If you often at parties people will just talk about drinking a lot. Essentially these are people giving themselves a label as somebody who likes to party. Possibly a label, quite often a label given to themselves by others as a result of direct experience. So that's kind of how this would work. Okay. So that's enough on labeling theory, probably. So for next week or the week after, technically the last half of this week is off, right? This is Holy Week, in case in social distancing you forgot. I'm not requiring you to respond Wednesday and Friday. Instead, enjoy your Holy Week with your family. And next week, I won't post a new video. This will be the video for next week. And then Wednesday and Friday, you can then post. If you want to post early, you can at any point. So, and if there's enough posts up, you feel free to respond on Friday. At your guys' leisure. So for next week, we're going to talk about phenomenology. In particular, phenomenology as it interacts with criminology. I'm gonna just wait and see what you guys get out of the reading. The reading is not so far. A lot of our readings have been primary text, meaning that the theorists themselves are writing it. Usually the main theorist for each of those theories. So the person who's seen as sort of the creator of that theoretical perspective. That's not going to be true of this week's reading. This week's reading came out of a textbook. It's a different criminology and deviance textbook than the one I assigned to you, the Cooperin one, at the first half of the semester. Anyway, so I want to see what you guys get out of the phenomenology chapter. Phenomenology is deeply interconnected with the specific philosophical tradition, but it has ramifications for criminology, and there's criminological variants of it. In particular, there's a section there's two sections in that we'll probably talk about. I'll talk about in the next video. I'm going to be talking about Alfred Schutz and what Alfred Schutz is doing with phenomenology, as well as the one that's very specific. So Alfred Schutz is the figure who brings phenomenology into sociology, which is how criminology comes into contact with it. I've said this before, criminology is best understood as it's just another subdiscipline of sociology. And then the specific, a more specific application of it that interlocks with criminology, which is Mary Douglas's work on purity and evil. So yeah, we'll look at that in more detail. So other than that, have a great week and stay safe, and I look forward to hearing from you soon. Have a good day.